Well, Valerie Jerome is a retired track and field star coming from a legendary track and field family. She competed for Canada at the 1960 Rome Olympics, at the Commonwealth and the Pan American Games, and her brother, the famed Harry Jerome, was a bronze medalist at the 1964 Tokyo Olympics and set a total of 7 world records throughout his career. And her grandfather, John Howard, was Canada's first Black Olympian. It is a storied tale for this family, but one that also includes facing horrible racism. And Valerie details her family's struggles and successes in a new book. It's called Races: The Trials and Triumphs of Canada's Fastest Family. And Valerie joins me now here in our studio. Hello, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's really good to speak with you. This can't have been an easy book to write. Why did you want to share this part of your story?
Well, actually, when I wrote it, it was, I won't say easy to write, but it was bursting to come out. I wrote this 32 years ago and have been in search of a publisher for these 32 years. And when I sat down to write it, I felt that there was so much grief bottled up in me that it had to come out. And my younger brother had just recently died and had left me some money to take the year out of school. And I wanted to tell his story, as well as Harry's story, as well as the story of my family. And so it actually burst out and it poured out of me for 4 months. I don't think I got out of my nightgown for 4 months.
Just writing these stories bursting out of you. How did those experiences, moving to North Vancouver in the 1950s, how did they shape you and your family?
Well, my family was shaped by a lot of racism that had been dealt out before we even moved to North Vancouver. My grandfather had faced a great deal of racism in his athletic, in his entire life, but he ran in the 1912 Olympics for Canada. Yes. He was a man who really struggled with the very overt and acceptable racism of his generation. And my mother was his eldest child. She suffered a great deal of racism that I struggled to come to grips with in this story, in as much as my mother never wanted to talk about this black man who was her father. She, in her own way, struggled with her relationship and her identity with him. So by the time we moved 1951 from Winnipeg to North Vancouver, we knew what racism felt like. But coming to North Vancouver was a bit surprising. We hadn't anticipated the petition in the neighborhood. We hadn't anticipated the children
to not move there.
Yeah, we hadn't anticipated that the welcome would be so unwelcoming, that we were stoned from the school grounds and didn't get to school on the first day because the students were armed with stones and they used them, and they were expressing the anger of their parents whose petition had failed at City Hall, a petition to block our moving to the neighborhood. So racism wasn't new, it was just at a more overt level by the time we moved to North Vancouver.
Yeah. I'm so sorry for your experiences.
Well, our country was built on racism. The Indigenous people were moved off their lands, their homes, hidden away in residential schools and on reservations that weren't necessarily the most desirable land. We blocked people of color from immigrating to this country. Up until about the 1930s, we were begging Europeans continually to move here, to take over, be farmers in Saskatchewan, Manitoba. We advertised all over Europe to bring in white people. At the same time, Indigenous people were locked away. Black people were limited to 100 immigrants per year. And South Asians and people from Ceylon were limited to 50 immigrants per year. So the country was really set up to be as unwelcoming as it proved to be. You know, it was meant to be a white country.
How did that, I mean, how did you reconcile that with representing Canada as a star athlete, you know, you and your brother?
Well, it's interesting because, our days were not happy ones at school. I mean, I enjoyed the classroom once the door was closed and, we were in our desks. I did have some fine teachers along the way. But, things weren't happy at home either. My mother having great difficulties adjusting to her life as it turned out to be. And so finding track and field was magic. We trained at Brockton Oval in the beautiful Stanley Park. It was easy to reconcile that because there, when your flag goes up for a medal at the Pan American Games, you're from Canada. You're not a black Canadian. You're a whole, real Canadian, not just a hyphenated Canadian. So the world of athletics not only provided us this free and easy, very happy place to be and to release all this pent-up energy, it was also something that honored us as full Canadians, not hyphenated Canadians. So.
Did you and Harry talk about that?
Oh, yes. Harry was always talking about the flag going up. That was one of his goals his whole life was, watching the flag go up. What he really wanted was opportunities for everybody in the country to have that opportunity to experience the freedom you get with sport, to get the freedom to represent your country as a whole Canadian. That was very much a part of his mindset.
Wow. And here you are now talking about this and really revealing a lot of the pain that you had. There's a broader discussion around racism that's really come to the fore since 2020, the murder of George Floyd. What do you hope? And at the same time, we also heard that Canada, there's this false idea that we're not like the United States when it comes to racism. What do you hope people learn or take away from your book? That here's this family that is so famed for achievements, and having faced such horrible racism. What do you hope people take away?
Well, I don't know that very many Canadians even know about us, believe it or not. It took me 32 years to get a publisher, and as you say, it was tragic that it had to be the death of George Floyd on our television, the murder of George Floyd on our television screens, that allowed Canadians to open their thinking a little. But for Canadians in Eastern Canada, going to a publisher there, it would be like, well, I've never heard of Harry Jerome, as if they only publish books about people they know. And I think that there is a very large story to be learned here. I think that Canadians, perhaps they're unconscious of some of it. It's hard to believe, but I do think that they don't see us as being part of their tribe, white Canadians. When they read things, if you lived in Toronto and you can say, well, I never heard of Harry Jerome. For all of the 1980s and 90s, there were the huge Harry Jerome Awards in Toronto, and every year I would meet the Prime Minister there and the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor General, and it was a big deal. And the newspapers would print whole sections based around the Harry Jerome Awards, who the winners would be, who the nominees had been. And yet, I think for most white Canadians, they look at that newspaper and they see pictures of black people. That's not their tribe. It's like me looking at the comic books, the comics in the newspaper. I just keep turning the pages, and I think a lot of Canadians are like that. They're not our tribe. We just turn the page. So the story you might like to think is out there, but I personally don't think it's out there at all. And I think people do see it as very separate. That's why the police can walk up to a provincial court judge here, an 80-year-old man, and attempt to arrest him as though he's a 39-year-old man, because they don't see any difference with us. We're just a block of people who are colored, and either they don't read about us or they don't know that we're actually individual people. Now, of course, I'm not saying that is relevant to all white Canadians. Certainly not. But I think there's a fair amount of that out there.
You're referring to the case of Justice
Yeah,
Selwyn.
Selwyn Romilly, yes.
You know, I know the name Harry Jerome very well. I grew up in North Vancouver, and so definitely the legacy is very familiar to me. What do you hope then, given this new context, new to readers, is the legacy of your family, of yourself, and of Harry?
What do you mean? What do I?
We know your family as the fastest family, as a racing family. But given this, then, do you hope to make an impact on that conversation?
Yeah, I hope it will make an impact. I do think to some degree, when I look at the black athletes of today in Canada, of whom I'm so proud, Andre and, Marco and these decathletes, I'm so proud. I think their entrance into the lives of Canadians is having a larger impact, and I think that that's a good thing. I think that my story can give the backstory to how these current athletes have got there. I like to think it can make an impact, but they have to pick it up and read it. They have to choose to read it, and it doesn't necessarily mean because the book's out there that it's going to be read. I'm hoping people will read it.
Well, I'm sure you paved the way for the likes of Andre DeGrasse. What a pleasure to speak with you, and I've learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Valerie Jerome, a retired track and field star. Her new book is Races, the Trials and Triumphs of Canada's Fastest Family. She has a copy here with her today as well.